Hello and welcome. The open source software movement has renovated the socio-technical arena and upended traditional economic logic. This presentation addresses this important movement's origins, economics, and social implications. Much of the analysis stems from Clay Shirky's book, Here Comes Everybody, on the phenomenon of crowdsourcing. Here Comes Everybody is an exploration of how technologically cheapened transaction costs shape the contemporary social and business landscapes. Three concepts are key in Shirky's analysis of all crowdsourcing phenomena: Coasian economic logic, which we will apply to software production, the power law distribution, which we will see in software consumption, and the publish-then-filter pattern, which arises between users and producers. The publish-then-filter pattern is readily applicable to the most famous and arguably most successful open-source project, the GNU Linux operating system, which rivals Microsoft's Windows in the market share of web server operating systems. The Finnish programmer Linus Torvalds posted the following about his then unknown project, which was to become a computing revolution. Although the project lacked important features that would have been essential to a commercial release, it was published. The community, in turn, filtered out less desirable aspects of the project, improved upon it, and created a lasting feat of computation. Linux was distributed under the GNU General Public License. The license, spearheaded by Richard Stallman, requires developers to permit community members to modify their software. The success of GNU Linux inspired a plethora of other open source projects. Apache, for example, is an open source program that serves most web pages. The open source browser Firefox currently views about 30% of all web pages. Open source projects are important due to their prominence within computing and the increasing importance of computing in daily life. However, it turns out that these wild open source success stories are few and far between, a quality best quantified by a power law distribution. The pink unicorn power curve shows that a minority of the SourceForge projects receive the majority of use. Similarly, hundreds of people contribute small patches to the GNU Linux kernel, but only a handful make the majority of the changes. This directly opposes the competitive equal contribution model practiced by most firms, one of the many ways that open source defies traditional economics. Coasian economic logic, a Nobel Prize-winning idea first espoused by Ronald Coase, reasonably presumes that formal organizations have operating costs. Formal organizations must sustain their existence by charging consumers for some type of transaction. When transaction costs collapse, businesses fold because the profit derived from the activity is no longer sufficient to pay for the cost of being an institution. In this case, individuals step in to accomplish the business's formerly performed tasks. Since individuals or small groups are now able to take risks that formal organizations could not endure, new ideas are tried without fear of economic repercussion. Thus, failure is cheapened by virtue of information technology, and progress is made for little to no cost. Open source software is frequently provided free of charge, making the technology accessible to those of lesser economic means. Although little can combat unequal hardware access, open source software bridges the digital divide by eliminating the initial investment barrier in software. Open source has created novel strategies in patent law. For example, Novell, the company responsible for SUSE Enterprise Linux, reluctantly files for software patents when it creates an innovation, yet it disclaims all royalties on any patents it is granted. Some open source licenses pioneer new techniques of promoting human rights. The Debian license, for example, precludes discrimination against individuals based on race or other distinctions. The ubiquity of internet connections and the liberating terms of open source licenses make it possible for individuals to collaborate on software projects around the world, regardless of the economic station or institutional affiliation that they might have. In essence, the open source software movement is an important alternative software development model that affects millions of software users. Even if the open source movement were to die tomorrow, the fruits of its labor would endure for decades. Yet the open source movement is far from dying. In fact, recent research shows that the overall number of open source projects and the overall number of lines of code contributed to open source projects is growing at an exponential rate. More information on the open source movement can be found at the Open Source Initiative's website.